It was a cold autumn evening when Emma and her stepbrother James found themselves alone in the sprawling, old house they had just moved into. The house had always been mysterious, with its creaky floors and dark corners. Their parents were away for the weekend, leaving Emma and James to explore the house on their own. James, always the adventurous one, had a fascination with the house's eerie history. He often told Emma stories of the strange events that had occurred there long before they moved in. Emma, on the other hand, was more skeptical but couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The night had started innocently enough. They sat on the couch in the living room, sharing a bowl of popcorn and watching an old movie. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, a strange feeling washed over Emma. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows, and the house seemed to creak and groan as if it had a life of its own. "Did you hear that?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James, still engrossed in the movie, glanced over at her. "What? The wind? It's nothing, Em. Just an old house." But Emma wasn't convinced. She'd heard something, like a faint whisper, or perhaps footsteps. It was too quiet to be certain. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the TV screen went black. The room was plunged into darkness. "Great, just great," James muttered, standing up to check the fuse box. Emma stayed seated, her heart racing. The room felt colder, and she could hear the sound of her own breathing in the silence. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, almost as if they were alive. She glanced at the old grandfather clock in the corner. It was 11:55 p.m., 5 minutes until midnight. Out of nowhere, a loud bang echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps. "James," Emma called out, her voice trembling. "James, come back." There was no answer. Panic surged through her as she stood up, instinctively moving toward the stairs. But before she could take a step, a cold hand clasped around her wrist. She screamed, spinning around to find James standing behind her, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. I saw something," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "What?" Emma whispered, the fear in her chest intensifying. "What did you see?" James swallowed hard, looking past her, his gaze fixed on something in the darkness. "Something or someone. I don't know, but we have to leave. Now." Emma's heart pounded as she followed James's gaze toward the dark hallway. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if something unseen was watching them. "We can't just leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the silence. "What if it's just the wind?" James shook his head. "No, Emma. I saw something move upstairs. And those footsteps, someone's in the house." A shiver ran down Emma's spine. She had always been skeptical of ghosts and horror stories, but the fear in James's eyes was real. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Then let's check it out together." James hesitated, but Emma was already grabbing the flashlight from the shelf. With a deep breath, they stepped onto the staircase. The old wooden steps creaked under their weight as they ascended, the dim light from the flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. Halfway up, they heard it again, a soft whisper, followed by a slow, deliberate knock on a door. James gripped Emma's wrist. "That came from Mom and Dad's bedroom," he murmured. They reached the top of the stairs, standing before their parents' door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible inside. James pushed it open. The room was empty, except for the large antique mirror on the far wall. Emma felt her breath catch. In the mirror, she saw something impossible. A woman stood there, dressed in a long black gown, her face hidden in the shadows. But in the room itself, there was no one. James must have seen it too, because he stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. Emma's voice trembled. Who are you?" The woman in the mirror slowly lifted her head. And then, in a whisper that sent chills down their spines, she spoke. "You shouldn't be here." The room plunged into darkness. The darkness swallowed them whole. Emma reached for James, but he was no longer beside her. "James," she whispered, but the silence that followed was deafening. A sudden, cold breath brushed against her neck. She turned sharply, the flashlight flickering back to life in her trembling hands. The mirror, now empty. The woman was gone. Emma's pulse raced as she stumbled toward the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. A whisper filled the room, surrounding her. You shouldn't be here, but now, you can never leave. A piercing scream rang out. The flashlight flickered one last time, and in that brief glow, Emma saw something that shattered her soul. James, standing in the corner, his face blank, his eyes completely black. The last thing she heard before the light died forever was a quiet, sinister chuckle. And then, silence.